Not you. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The photographer had just finished adjusting the lights when the instruction came, quick, precise, like it had already been decided before I stepped into the frame. Everyone except her. A small pause followed. Not confusion. Recognition. Because they all knew who her was. Me. I stood there for a moment, not moving, not reacting, just confirming. Step out for a second, one of them added, smiling like it was a minor adjustment. We want this one to be just immediate family. Immediate family. That phrase always sounds reasonable, until you realize who it excludes. I am immediate family, I said. Calm. Neutral. Enough to be heard. That created a slight shift. Not in the room. In the tone. A few glances were exchanged. Quick. Subtle. Because now, they had to say it directly. This is a formal portrait, someone explained. We're keeping it traditional. Traditional. Another word that sounds harmless. Until it isn't. I didn't move. Because now, it wasn't about the photo. It was about clarity. Traditional how? I asked. There it was. The moment they had been avoiding. A small pause. Then, let's not make this complicated, they said. It's just not the right look. The right look. That's when it became clear. Not implied. Not subtle. Clear. I looked at them for a second. Not offended. Not surprised. Just understanding. You mean I don't fit, I said. No one answered that directly. They didn't need to, because silence confirms what words avoid. It's not personal, someone added quickly. Of course. It never is. That's fine, I said. And that caught them off guard, because they expected resistance. Emotion. Something they could respond to. I didn't give them that. Instead, I stepped back. Out of the frame. Calm. Controlled. Certain. Thank you, the photographer said, already refocusing on the group like nothing had happened. Like this was normal. Like this made sense. And maybe to them. It did. I stood to the side, watching. Not the people. The structure. The arrangement. The image they were creating. Perfect. Polished. Complete. Without me. And that was the point. They didn't want disruption. They wanted control. A version of things that looked exactly the way they believed it should. And I didn't fit into that version. At least, not visibly. Smile, the photographer said. They did. Of course they did. Because everything was exactly how they wanted it. Every detail. Every position. Every person. Exactly where they believed they belonged. The camera clicked. Once. Then again. Capturing something that looked perfect. Something that felt complete. Something that wasn't. I turned away before the final shot. Not out of discomfort. Because I didn't need to see it. I already understood it. The rest of the event continued like nothing had happened. Conversations. Laughter. Subtle looks that pretended not to notice what had just occurred. Because acknowledging it would make it real. And they didn't want that. You handled that well, someone said quietly as they passed me. Like it was a compliment. Like silence was something to be rewarded. I understood the situation, I replied. That answer ended the conversation. Because there was nothing else to say. They had made their decision. They had shown me exactly how they saw me. Where I stood. What I represented. And, more importantly, what I didn't. By the time the evening ended, everything felt settled. Not resolved. Settled. Because once something like that happens, it doesn't need to be discussed. It just exists. I stepped outside, the air cooler, quieter. The kind of stillness that makes everything clearer. Not heavier. Clearer. I pulled out my phone, glancing at the screen. Everything was already in motion. Exactly as it had been. Unaffected. Because what had just happened wasn't part of the plan. It was just the moment that revealed it. I opened a message thread. Short, direct. Proceed. The reply came almost instantly. Understood. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked back at the house one last time. Lights still on. People still inside. Unaware. Because what they thought they controlled was about to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. And by the time they realized it, it wouldn't be a conversation anymore. It would be a reality. One they couldn't step out of. They didn't notice anything at first. That's how shifts like this always begin. Quiet, unseen. Everything moved forward exactly as it had before. The same routines, the same confidence, the same belief that everything was stable, that nothing had changed. But something had. They just hadn't felt it yet. The first sign came 2 days later. A letter. Official. Structured. Not dramatic. Just clear. It arrived with everything else. Mail stacked neatly, opened casually, handled like any other document that didn't need attention. Until it did. "What is this?" someone asked. Not loudly, but enough. Enough for others to look. "It's from the bank," another replied. That shouldn't have meant anything. Not to them. Because in their world, things like that were always handled. Always secure. Always predictable. "Open it," someone said. It was opened. Read. Then read again. Slower. More carefully. Because now, something didn't make sense. "It says the account is under review," they said. "That doesn't sound right," another added quickly. Of course it didn't. Because it didn't fit into what they believed. "Keep reading," someone said. They did. And that's when it shifted. The property. They paused, their voice tightening slightly. "It's flagged for foreclosure proceedings." Silence. Immediate. Heavy. Because now, this wasn't just information. It was disruption. "That has to be a mistake," someone said. Of course. Because mistakes are easier to accept than reality. "We've never missed anything," another added. "Everything's always been." They stopped. Because now, they weren't sure. That confidence wasn't as solid as it used to be. "Call them," someone said quickly. A phone was already in hand. Dialing. Waiting. Trying to fix something they didn't understand. "This doesn't make sense," they said when the call connected. "We received a notice." There must be some kind of error. A pause. Listening. Then, "No, that can't be right," they replied. Another pause. Longer this time. More real. "What do you mean ownership changed?" they asked. That question stayed. Because it mattered. Not to the bank. To them. Another silence. Then, "Yes, I understand," they said slowly. "But who approved that?" Another pause. And then, nothing. Because whatever answer they received wasn't what they expected. The call ended. The room stayed still. Not frozen. Just uncertain. Because now, everything they believed was being questioned. That's when my phone rang. I looked at the screen for a second before answering. "What's going on?" they asked immediately. No greeting. No control. Just tension. "What do you mean?" I replied. "The bank," they said. "There's a notice. Something about foreclosure ownership. This doesn't make sense." "I see," I said. Silence. Then, "You knew about this?" they asked. That question again. Always after the moment. "Yes," I said. A pause. Sharp. Focused. "What does that mean?" they pressed. I leaned back slightly, letting the moment settle. "It means the structure changed," I said. "That's not possible," they replied quickly. "We've always handled everything." They stopped. Because now, they weren't sure. "That stability," I said quietly. "Where do you think it came from?" No answer. Because they had never asked. They had never needed to. Until now. "This has nothing to do with you," they said. That line almost made me pause. Not because it was wrong, because it was incomplete. It does, I replied. Another silence. Longer. More real. The bank handling your property, I continued, is no longer operating the way you think it is. What does that mean? They asked. It means ownership changed, I said. That landed. Because now, they were listening. They said the decision came from the top, they added. Yes, I replied. Another pause. And then, you're saying that was you, they asked. I didn't rush. Didn't soften it. Didn't explain it. Yes. One word. Simple. Final. Nothing came back immediately. Because now, everything connected. The notice. The call. The shift. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It was structure. And that structure was mine. That doesn't make sense, they said quietly. It doesn't have to, I replied. Because reality doesn't need to match expectation. It just exists. This is because of what happened at the portrait, they asked. That question almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, because it was small. No, I said. That just made things clear. Another silence. Because now, they understood. Not everything, but enough. You excluded something you didn't understand, I continued, and assumed it didn't matter. No response. Because there wasn't one. You built everything around that assumption, I said. And now, I paused. Not for effect. For clarity. You're seeing what happens when it's removed. That landed. Not loudly, but completely. What do we do? They asked. That question again. Different situation. Same meaning. I didn't rush to answer, because this wasn't about giving instructions. It was about understanding. You move forward, I said. How? They asked. The same way I did, I replied, without assuming anything is guaranteed. That landed. Because now, they understood. Not everything, but enough. I ended the call. No final words. No need. Because the situation itself was the answer. I stood there for a moment, letting everything settle. Not victory. Not revenge. Just balance. They removed me from the picture. Decided I didn't belong. Defined me by what they thought they saw. They were wrong. Because what they didn't see was everything holding their world together. And now, they had to face it. Without it,